Perfect. All right, this is the April Public Safety Committee meeting for ANC 1A, and we are here with the DC Peace team. And so, Professor McCarthy, I'm not sure if I should turn it over to you or another colleague on your team, but we would love to hear from you all. And what is a peace team, and specifically, what is the DC Peace team, and how can we partner with you all?
Thank you so much, Commissioner. We're very excited and honored to be with you. We have a few pieces we want to kind of share and open up some discussion around. So Merwin is going to get us started, and then we'll walk through some of the aspects of the work that we do, and then maybe see if you're open to sharing a little bit more about some of the needs in the community, and then we can identify perhaps some spaces of partnership. So. Merlin?
Okay, excuse me. Are you all hearing me well? Yes, okay, good. Welcome once again to you all, particularly to the members of the DC Peace teams who are sharing the space here with you all. Just like to go over a couple of what we heard at the March meeting with you. We heard about the existing protection apparatus that you have on the ground, how you go about your work, how you build community there, beginning with mutual aid, getting to know your neighbors. I think, Bob has stated that very often, it's most essential, getting to know your neighbors, building the relationships, establishing who are the connectors in the neighborhood, which allows you to do your work, your protection work. Getting to know the youth programs, and those were some of the things that we talked about. And those of us from DC Peace teams who are on that call learned a lot, particularly from how the commissioners talked about how they relate to the neighborhood and how it intersects with the work of the commissioners. Eli?
Okay, thank you, Merwin. So just a little bit on the background of DC Peace team, and then sort of the three areas that we do most of our work in terms of programs. We began back in about 2011 with a companionship with a fellow named Cortez McDaniel, who grew up in some of the southeast parts of DC and ended up spending a lot of time in prison, and came out, and he wanted to do something really constructive for his community. He was part of a group called the National Homecomers Academy of returning citizens from the DC area. So him and I took a couple initial kind of trainings with the Nonviolent Peace Force, which is a pretty large organization that does unarmed protection around the world in war zones like South Sudan and Iraq and Myanmar and so forth. And he got really excited. He was like, I could really see this happening in DC. I could see this helping contribute to the violence prevention work. So we ended up starting with a number of different trainings, training the homecomers, and they became trainers. And then we had different communities and groups. And one of the first, projects that he thought would be helpful was to support something called a Safe Passage program. So this was a group of maybe 10 to 15 adults in different neighborhoods in sort of Southeast and Anacostia that would walk a circle, pretty much a route in the morning where kids were walking to school, and then a route where kids were walking home from school. And these were in neighborhoods where there had been fights or some shootings, and they were basically trying to offer a sense of support, that there were adults and others in the community that would be there, would be present, would try to intervene when they could. So out of that sort of initial project, we've really developed three basic areas of work today, and we're very excited about the movement around the US to create alternative community protection, and all the different cities and coalitions that are building to find out other mechanisms so that people can respond to conflict in their community without resorting to groups that bring more arms into the situation, such as the police. So the three areas of work that we do are, one is a set of trainings, skill trainings. Now, our basic focus is try to cultivate the habits and skills of nonviolence so that we can become more nonviolent communities. And by that, we can better resist injustice and build a more sustainable, just peace. So the training modules that we offer are four basic types. Nonviolent communication, which is for interpersonal conflict, where we kind of work on trying to understand not just the feelings, but the needs underneath the conflicts, underneath the behaviors and the strategies that are happening. Bystander intervention is for when you come upon a situation where someone's being harassed on a street, at a metro, at a party, in a store, and you want to figure out what are some ways to intervene and to de-escalate and to help people be safe. Restorative Circles is another major training in terms of identifying harm and how to heal the harm with different conflicts. And then Unarmed Civilian Protection is the deployment of actual teams to spaces of hostility. So I'll share a little bit more about Unarmed Civilian Protection. I do want to pop a link in here. This is just a kind of list of some of the different sectors and organizations that we've offered trainings to. So, just for example, like a lot of local service or social workers like Joseph's House and McKenna Center and Mount Pleasant Mutual Aid, as well as teachers and religious organizations like All Souls Church, which is based nearby. So the second major area that we do is the unarmed civilian protection deployments. So Safe Passage was an example of that early on. We also had a project at Gallery Place where there was a lot of moments where youth were getting into fights or police were harassing the youth. So we had a team there Friday and Saturday nights for a few hours each night that were kind of monitoring, intervening when need be, trying to build relationships with the key stakeholders in that space to prevent violence from happening. And that again was a project from Cortez's vision. Now we also do unarmed protection to political demonstrations. So a lot of the demonstrations that happen in DC, particularly if there's a counter protest or it's towards police brutality, for example, we're often part of the larger safety team or protection team for the different demonstrations, working with the local organizers. We were at many of the election demonstrations from November through January, Black Lives Matter marches and so forth. I mean, we had a number of stories. There's an article on our website that goes into a whole bunch of stories and de-escalations, around 50 or so de-escalations that happened. One of them was when there was a man who was a large white man in camouflage, and he was walking past BLM Plaza, and he started yelling at somebody in the plaza, and it was a black man who started yelling back at him, and eventually they were like, "Come on, let's go, we're gonna fight, I'll take you right now, let's go down the alley, I'll take you down." And one of our peace team members was kind of monitoring it, and the white guy got out on the street there about 4 feet away, and the white guy pulls out this big knife. It's long and black with the different blades. And he's like, "What are you gonna do now, huh? What are you gonna do?" So the peace team member got up about 4 feet away, put the hands up, said, let's slow down. Don't need this knife. You can put it away. It's not gonna help anything here. And the guy with the knife's kind of looking over and then looks back, and he takes a step back, a little bit of a pause. And in that pause, guys his friends on the sidewalk came out and pulled him back and said, "It's not worth it, it's not worth it." And they kept walking, and they still kept yelling, but the fight didn't happen. So that's the unarmed civilian protection piece. And then the last piece or sort of set of programs is Restorative Circles. Chris is one of our main trainers for that. So I want to see, Chris, if you're open to just sharing a little bit about what that work is like.
Sure. Thank you, Dr. McCarthy, and commissioners. Thank you for the space to chat and to share and to build relationship. The root of restorative justice, as Dr. McCarthy said so beautifully, is about, at its core, healing harm. But more significantly, I think we are seeing a transformation of not just approaching justice through a lens of defining right versus defining wrong, but we as a community are now looking to transform that thinking of moving from rightness or wrongness to a space of harm done to harm healed. And the very essence of restorative justice surrounds or is rooted in that idea that we are here to repair harm through its four primary questions: what happened, who was harmed, what do you, what do they, what do we need to heal, and how can we take steps to move forward in that healing process starting today. So I'm sure, knowing the extensive work and experience that you all have, I am sure you are all very familiar with the principles of RJ. But what I appreciate about my work with the peace team is that we see the linkage between restorative justice in a circle context, or in a victim offender dialogue context, or in a restorative inquiry, in other words, an individual speaking with another individual context. We see those linkages with our work as unarmed civilian protectors. I would say, and Eli, do hop in if you disagree with this, but I would say that as protectors of peace, as peacemakers, as many of us are, the goal is to limit the dehumanization and re-inject humanity into situations. One of our dear colleagues has always shared that the most powerful phrase in a de-escalation of a situation is, "I hear you, I hear you, I hear you." And I think as we see tensions continue to simmer, as we see divisions continue to entrench themselves, I think in my mind that the root of engaging folks on a much deeper level is addressing that question of validity. Who is valid in the eyes of the quote unquote law, and who is valid thus in the eyes of the quote unquote culture that they find themselves in. But the restorative practices that we try to practice are really rooted in allowing and providing a space for folks to share, to answer those questions of each other and of themselves, and also take those core questions, that core idea of repairing harm rather than identifying and then punishing a quote unquote wrong. Taking those questions and those skill sets back into their schools, back into their communities, back into their places of work, of their places of worship. And oftentimes, as we are now expanding to, into places of imprisonment, which do not follow that tenet, as we have seen throughout our extensive and brutal history here in the United States. But once again, thank you for letting me share, and I invite my other fellow DC Peace team members to chime in and hop in on that explanation.
Thanks, Chris. Just a couple of examples of the work. So there's a lot of groups that have requested different types of circles. So the community that is unhoused or is kind of low income, that goes to the Mechanic Center, for example, on a regular basis. We had a circle process every couple of weeks. We did circles there when we were doing stuff in person, just to kind of help folks talk about personal struggles, family struggles, community struggles. We've also done circles for like the DC birth worker and doula community. They were having some internal challenges, so they asked us to run circles to help them process some of that. Some of it was around racism as well. And we've done circles in Garfield Hills over in Anacostia for a group of community leaders that were having struggles with the youth in their community, and they weren't sure how to handle it. They were either too loud, or other types of things were happening, and they had a lot of trauma in this kind of generational trauma stuff that shows up in our neighborhood sometimes. So we did a series of restorative trauma-informed healing circles over a year-long kind of process. So those are kind of the three buckets of work: the training, the UCP deployments, and the restorative circles. Let me just show you a quick picture, and then we kind of want to open it up a little bit to some reflection on kind of what's been happening and what are some ways to kind of collaborate. These are just a few images just to give you a little bit of a sense, but you'll see up here in the top left, this is Eliane Lockham. So she's one of our main trainers in like bystander intervention, and has also been a key in our anti-racism series of circles that's going on presently. This was a picture in the top right at one of the Black Lives Matter marches. So we wear these yellow vests, DC Peace Team. On the back, it says lighting up human dignity. Then on the front, down here in the bottom left, says DC Peace Team. And then that's just our logo. So it's just a little bit of images. So I guess one of the questions we had, after kind of sharing a little bit of the background, is, you know, we've got a little bit of kind of what's going on in your community. We've heard about some of the, you know, the systemic needs around affordable housing, and employment, and education, as well as physical and mental health. We're just wondering if you could say anything more about where conflict or harm is occurring in Ward 1A, between whom, and, you know, around when. Is it Friday nights? Is it Sunday mornings? Just a little more detail, and then maybe we can then, I'll hand it over to Margie to kind of unpack some ways that we might be able to collaborate.
Commissioner Wood, go ahead. Or you might have frozen. Oh, may have lost connection there. I'm happy to start and would invite others to share their reflections and experiences. So I'm in the northern part of Columbia Heights off 14th Street. And so there are a couple blocks and alleyways in particular by me where we do have a number of unhoused neighbors. I know when the city was doing like the annual count, some of them were like newly identified as unhoused and were unaware of some of the resources the city has. And I think their situation had changed as a result of COVID, unfortunately. And we have pretty blatant like open air drug markets and like sales and use of drugs. We have a number of sex workers, sometimes tied to that same group and sometimes separate from. And unfortunately, there have been a number of violent instances, either like among community members or with the police and our sex worker neighbors. And I do think at night and on the weekends, we do, at least by me, like have more activity going on. And we've seen a shift in the last year or so where some of the activity that was happening down at like 14th and Meridian has moved up closer to like my part of Columbia Heights. And there were a number of shootings and kind of like known crew, like DC crews that were having conflicts. And so from what I've been able to kind of piece together, some of that has been like retaliation and has resulted in some of those groups moving and kind of switching like where they're based out of. So I don't think all of those groups, like I don't think the Venn diagram is totally one-to-one of those different groups that I was describing, but definitely some interconnectedness there. Yeah, I'll pause there, and Commissioner Clark raised his hand, so I guess we'll go to you next. So polite.
Thank you so much. So I will say that I lived on 14th and Girard for 8 years now. And when I first moved in, there were police lights on the block and in response to different crew activity in the neighborhood. So there was a crew on this block, a crew up in Pentworth area when I talked to the police officers. I will say that that has gone down for sure, but I do also notice that I have a very hotbed of activity on the 1300 block of Columbia Road. So it's a very, very popular area. There's a recent shooting in front of Unity Health on 14th. So a lot of lots of robberies recently. I get the police alerts all the time. I'm sure there are other things that don't get reported, but just the things I see, snatch and grabs and stuff like that. So it's unfortunate to see this, and I don't know what can be done. I know a lot of education comes to it, but definitely happy to help out in any efforts to help improve the peace of the neighborhood.
Thanks. I did want to take an opportunity to let Commissioner Lehman Morales introduce himself. I know he joined a little later, so Commissioner.
Hi, everybody. My name is Dieter. I'm Commissioner for 1A02, just south of Commissioner Bonneau's district. This is my second time coming to these meetings. Happy to be here.
Thanks. And have you noticed anything kind of in your time living in the neighborhood that you want to share that might be helpful for the peace team? And if not, we can come back to you. No problem.
Not really. At least not recently. I mean, I think when I first moved to Columbia Heights a couple years ago, I never saw anything myself or heard or anything before I joined the commission, but I mean, I've always noted I always see a large police presence up and down 14th Street. So I attributed that to some sort of crime or something that's going on in the area. I mean, I don't know how efficient the large police presence is. I feel like it's more, at least in my personal opinion, it's more intimidating, or it's more off-putting than it is encouraging. Or I don't feel necessarily safer just because there's like a cop car in every block all the way down 14th Street. But I recently moved to the Allegro apartment building, so I'm even less removed now, I guess, in terms of just looking out my window and seeing anything. But when I go outside, I haven't really seen anything or I've heard anything. So I'm sure that will change, or I'm sure there's stuff I'm not aware of at the moment. But I'll keep you guys posted if that changes.
I'm sorry.
Thanks. And go ahead.
I'm sorry, my internet somehow, like my Zoom timed out as soon as I started speaking, so sorry about that. I think that Commissioner Clark probably brought up most of my SMD near my SMD that has some issues with violent crime. But I don't know, has anybody discussed the plaza yet? Okay, so the plaza that is on Kenyon and Park and 14th. So there's a plaza where a lot of people hang out, struggling with substance use disorders. That can become a pretty violent area sometimes, just because everybody, there's a large percentage of people who are drunk or on drugs at the same time. And so that's a very difficult area. It also kind of abuts the block of 14th Street that is Irving and to Kenyon, and that's sometimes there's issues there as well. I'm not really sure if it would be kind of within the purview of the DC peacekeepers to address the plaza, just because it's such a it's less emotional and more drug infused. So I don't know if that's something that you all would be interested in taking on or not.
Yeah, that's a great idea, Judson. I think it's a really good insight.
I actually have a couple follow-up questions, if that's okay. Is that all right, Eli?
Yeah, sure. Mm-hmm.
Awesome. So hold on, I wrote them down and the sun is like slowly, hold on a second. I'm sorry. Eli, if you want to say anything, go ahead. I'm going to turn on a light so I can actually see.
All right. Yeah, Go ahead, Lee.
While Margie's doing that, I wonder, Bob, if you wanted to add any reflection.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about. I think you guys all hit on the head, kind of just the violence that I see often. You know, I also think about the violence perpetrated by people colonizing the neighborhood and people in with extreme wealth, who have not integrated or taken the time to get to know the people around them. And I think that is a form of violence in and of itself. And it's obviously a little different than the violence we've been talking about. So that's something I think about often. And the corporations that are tearing up in homes right now and bringing all of their extra vehicles in to park illegally throughout the neighborhood. So it's interesting to see kind of developers reign supreme. The number one donor to our mayor, to our current council member, to half of our council members at large are all developers. And I think what they're doing in the ward is incredibly violent itself, just to add to another type of violence we've been speaking about.
Awesome. That's all really helpful. So my first question was for Layla, and it was surrounding so the sex workers, the violence, without kind of going into anything like traumatic or too explicit. Like, is there any way you could elaborate on like kind of the like where the, I guess I know you said that it can be between community members, but also with like police. Is there and that it happens at night? Is there any type of like underlying theme in these types of interactions that like, is it because they're there in general? Is it because there's like an altercation? Like, is there? I guess I'm trying to get at an underlying like who in that situation needs support.
Yeah, I mean, I have more like anecdotal instances of what's happened. I know that like Decrim Now and some of our other partners in the sex work space are better informed probably on like the rates at which things are happening, or maybe more broadly why some of that's happening. I think from what I've seen and heard, there's just like a lack of respect from the police in interacting with residents in a number of settings, like not limited to our like not limited to sex workers. So like if people are having a mental episode or are drunk or are on drugs. And I mean, this committee has had a lot of conversations about decentering the police and the need to invest in other agencies and resources and organizations. And so I think this is probably just another example of that, where you have like any kind of conflict going on. And it could be some of these colonizers Bob's talking about are like, oh, there's like scantily clad, loud, drunk ladies of the night on the corner, I'm going to call MPD, right? And like that is what MPD will call them. And it's just, yeah, it's a total breakdown. And unfortunately, there have been just like violent episodes like off of 14th Street. There is like a known, there's a known house where like a lot of this activity takes place. And because it's illegal, often sex workers will be like pushed out of the house and left in the alley for like the ambulance or whoever to like come give them support. So it's a pretty challenging area.
No, that's super, super helpful information. Yeah. Okay, great. And my next follow-up question was just was for Judson on the plaza that you're referring to. Where, like, when does that, is it a constant like concern, or is it normally like during certain time periods that it's tends to be more rowdy, more or less, or problematic?
The way that it was explained to me is that a lot of the people who are struggling in that plaza, they actually are not unhoused. They just are like, they had substance use disorders that don't allow them to be home. Like their families won't allow them to be home during the time they're either drinking or doing drugs. Recently, the number of people sleeping in the plaza has gone up from what I've noticed. But it kind of just flows that as the day goes on, it gets a little bit worse. We have a lot of people sleeping or swaying around, and like I've seen a fight there before. I believe somebody got stabbed there once, but it kind of ebbs and flows, but also just as long as it takes to get very drunk, really.
That population in Columbia Heights used to get service and support from a low barrier homeless shelter that was down on Park Road a little farther away, that burnt down some years ago under very questionable conditions, and the shelter never got rebuilt. That then paired, I think, with COVID and people losing their jobs and day laborers having less opportunity to work, mixed with then Thrive, which is our main center for that are experiencing homelessness or couch surfing, also being closed for a significant part the last year, mixed with a lot of those folks being undocumented, has led to kind of a heightened moment of crisis for those folks in the circle that's evolved over the last at least 2 or 3 years that I've been watching it, been around.
Okay, yeah, that's all super helpful information. So just, I have some thoughts addressing that specifically, but I don't know. I'm still fairly new to this space, so Eli, I don't know if it's appropriate for me to just kind of go off the cuff without like actually, but maybe, I mean, I think it seems like, sorry, go ahead, Eli.
Yeah, I guess we wanted to share, maybe a few ideas, but are there other, based on what you've learned about what we do so far, are there other ideas that you have about how we might be able to support you in your work for public safety in the ward?
So it's interesting because just this week, a commissioner reached out that they were contacted by a couple neighbors who were having a disagreement on their block and basically wanted them to mediate like the dispute. And we're obviously like, that's not our, like, we're not trained to do that. And that's like not really our position, but I do think we're in a great position to connect neighbors to resources. That's like definitely our role. And so this commissioner was connected to, there's like the DC community mediation group. And so it just kind of got me thinking while you were talking about like the different trainings and supports that you all have, like, are there some basic trainings that commissioners should have the option of taking? And then especially when, like to Bob's point, when you have community members with very different lived experiences living near each other and increasing density in an area, that seems like a really great opportunity to also support neighbors with like with resources and trainings and stuff. So that is not a fully developed idea, but just some thinking that I was having.
Well, that's great, thank you. Anybody else before maybe Margie responds and we might maybe share some other ideas?
I think having a way for, my block has recently made a concerted effort to get to know each other. And I think it'd be great to help people. Like there was a person, for example, that had passed out after smoking maybe either K2 or a couple months ago. And it's kind of one of those instances, like, what do I do? Like, how do I even call my neighbor and say, hey, this thing is happening outside? You know, it'd be good to have something like walk through, like, here's what you can check first, and to check if they're health and responsive enough. Do you administer Narcan yourself? Or maybe there's a situation that you're not sure about. Helping neighbors even know how to communicate what's happening with one another, I think that would be really a valuable lesson.
Could I just chip in with a question that anybody could answer? Just having heard what you said, Bob, maybe I already know the answer, but just to clarify, are there any neighborhood events that bring people together, you know, like block parties or anything, you know, street kind of events, which are happening, ongoing festivals during particular times of the year, that are just natural events for people to gather together? Community gets to know each other, those kinds of things.
We do actually have a farmer's market every Saturday.
But there were a lot more events that COVID hit, right? There were lots of different festivals we had all over, and it's somewhat close, like in Mount Pleasant. We did used to have events in the Civic Plaza as well, but I think COVID kind of kiboshed all those lots. We had thought about having block parties just to get people to get together and do other activities that kept them busy. There were more fun activities with kids and everything. So there were plans to do that, but I don't think they really flashed out as much.
And maybe just the last question that I have. So what I'm trying to get at, are there natural connections in the neighborhood? So what is the role of like maybe the public library or schools in the neighborhood? What's going on around those kinds of institutions that are already there in terms of relationships between people? I'm just thinking about how, if DC Peace Teams comes in, what are those kinds of connections that DC Peace Teams might, or anybody else, working to build relationships, which I see is one of the main things that could happen.
Yeah, I think the public libraries and our schools. Oh, Chandler, hi, let's bring you up. I don't want to keep saying it's just like different because of COVID, but it is very different because of COVID. And so I think as people are getting vaccinated and we're talking about a return to fully in-person school in the fall, there are great opportunities to sort of revisit some of those opportunities while also being creative, because I think some kids will continue to, you know, be home and learning online. But yeah, like the library is such a wonderful resource. Like you can do yoga and learn how to administer Narcan and check out a book, like, and learn how to compost at home. Like, yeah, Commissioner Clark mentioned Department of Parks and Rec is another great resource.
There's also the middle school on Kenyon that I think it's that they have like a big soccer field. So that's a pretty big community gathering as well in nice times.
Margie, did you want to share some of your ideas, and then maybe we can unpack some more?
Sure. Chandler, I wanted to ask you though, do you have any thoughts on kind of like things that you've noticed that you would like to see improved, like in the area that you're living in, or things that you would like to see that you think maybe peacekeeping can help address?
You know, I live on Capitol Hill in the Hill East neighborhood. And what I know is, you know, what I have done is in the past is hold like meet the neighbors parties. So where we bring in the neighbors, but also invite anybody who's been hanging around, that whether it's dealing, smoking grass, whatever, it doesn't matter. It's not what it's about. It's about meeting everybody so the residents there know that they are safe. And so you get to know one another, or visually know one another. And you start to build that trust over food. Now I know that DC is not approving any block party applications. So what I tend to do is I will call, I'll go, if they're hanging out, I'll go and have a chat with them, not about anything specific, but just to start a conversation so that sometime in the future, I can build that relationship at some point in the future. I can address some of the issues that they're having. Mostly it has to do with, the lack of ability because of their prior record, of getting a job. And it really is unfortunate that we won't pay young people or anyone to get trained, because if they've already have bills, if they already have to pay for child support, if they already have to care for a child, how can they go 6 to 9 to 10 months to enter a training program with no income? They just can't do that, and they won't do it because it just doesn't make sense to them. So in terms of violence, I think establishing relationships, and what I've done is we've kind of established an agreement that kind of stuff that won't happen here, and they are equally as responsible for monitoring that. So I've asked them to take responsibility, particularly for anybody who's not from the neighborhood, that they're aware that, look, don't bring firearms into here. You come and hang out, that's fine, but don't bring firearms. I came in late, so I'm not sure if I even answered the question that you had.
You basically did my work for me. So, and they were all really great suggestions, and like, I really appreciate like door knocking. I think is, well, quote unquote door knocking, but like going one-on-one and just kind of having conversations, not with anything necessarily like as a motive other than just getting to know your neighbors. And then you're like, hey, like we have an established relationship. So in the future, like if I'm coming to you with something, there will be that basis there. I think that's really, really important. Some of the things that, some of the common themes that I've heard are kind of like addressing certain resource needs throughout these communities. And I think that some of what we can provide are like putting together, like gathering the resources that are already available and kind of making those like known. So like having cards to hand out, like, oh, here's an example. So I know within the activist community, they put together these, like very simple things that you can make them into bookmarks. You can make them into things, and they have a QR code, so they can have more than just what's on here as well. So they can have a few, like maybe one for each, but each for category, but then expand online, and they can go into more resources. And these can be things such as like emergency resources. These can be alternatives to policing for like mental health and things like that. They can be like sexual assaults. They can also be, like youth counseling and LGBTQ plus. Like they can span the whole gamut, but they can also touch on like the need for resources as well, and less of like the emergency services side of things. I don't know if you all have a place where that would be like, that you all would like to house that information, or would like, if that would be, if there's a website or something that it would be helpful to have that on, but something to keep in mind. And then also like offering kind of restorative justice circles between like these different communities, and kind of getting, and again, like that's, depending on the community, I think that could either come before or after the door knocking. I think that it could either be used as a way to kind of like an establish, like we're all coming together for this. Like if there's already a strong sense of community and people would like to get together, and you have that sense that like we have a couple players who would be like, hey, like I'm going to call a couple people, you call a couple people, and then we'll get a group of people together. Or it can be like we do door knocking first and then go into like something a little bit further down the line, once like we've established like, regular whatever interactions, whatever you want to call it, like with communities. But it can, I think like the first step in all of this is kind of getting the input and getting these communities kind of at the table to express what their needs are and express what their concerns are. Because we have a lot of wonderful people here, but like what I'm hearing is a lot of concern for these other communities, which is amazing. And like, that's so awesome. So just like getting that sense of what like their specific needs are from their point of view, I think is really, really important. And I also really appreciated what Bob was saying, especially in like the gentrification kind of aspect of things and the healing that should be taking place there, that in most places is most definitely not taking place, but that might be something down the line. But I think I appreciate it being brought up like very early in the process. Beyond that, I think, having like interacting, I will say, I think it would be really great to bring youth in as well, like very early on in the process. I think giving youth a sense of leadership in these decisions and a sense of purpose in their community is like something really, really cool. I don't know if there are any programs like that specifically, or any schools that would be, that come to mind as like good partners in this process. But I'm also not an expert on the DC school system, so please feel free to jump in. But yeah, and just offering like, again, I mean, I think having commissioners, if they have trainings on some of these basics with like either mediation, restorative justice, like any of those things that are fields of interest, that's wonderful. I mean, the more engagement, the better. But also like having a way for community members to reach out for these resources, and in that sense also making sure that if community members aren't going to their commissioners, if they're going to their faith leaders, if they're going to kind of well-respected individuals in the neighborhood who are well connected or who have been there for a long time, making sure that we also bring these people to the table early on, just so that we have a sense, but also not excluding anyone based on their prominence within the hierarchy of society or things like that. So what do people think about that? That's just a start.
Well, thank you, Margie, for sharing those. I would just add, I think the idea of having a presence at the plaza, a sort of de-escalation team or a safety team, however you want to describe it, could be a good kind of initial kind of pilot. And, we'd be happy to help train people from the neighborhood if they want to be part of that. Or we could have some people support it in the initial phases until it kind of grows and see how that goes.
Yeah, I'd actually add that there might be some activist groups who would be happy to do like mutual aid events there as well.
The other one that's been really continuing for a while now and continues to draw large crowds is Don't Mute DC with go-go music. And, there are, they go all around Ward 7, Ward 8 up to U Street. And I think if we can kind of partner with them, I think we can start to recruit the type of leaders that we want to be able to spread this message and maybe recruit more peace volunteers.
Yeah, to kind of build on that, Chandler, we'd be happy to do trainings for the commissioners to build up, nonviolent communication skills or bystander intervention skills. But, part of like really developing the capacity of a community to deal with conflict and prevent more intense violence is, I think, having some kind of regular set of trainings for community members to take as they're able to, right? Whether it's like a monthly nonviolent communication training or a monthly bystander intervention training, just those kind of things. Maybe it's done at the library or community center or wherever, where people know this is happening on a somewhat regular basis, and they can kind of improve their own confidence and skills to deal with conflicts that might start in the family, or they happen on the street, or they happen at the school. And then hopefully you have less and less of the shootings and the homicides and things like that.
Another place that might be is DUIR, Department of Youth Rehabilitation Services, has an achievement center right there by the big chair. And, granted, these were formerly court involved youth that have been out, but that's where they are invited to come in a safe space, and might be a good partnership with DYRS. I'm sure that they had coming out of Jerry M, that might be something they would really jump on too, because there was a shooting. One of the youth that was part of the program was shot right there, almost across the street. So they might be a good partner for that. And the former DYRS director is now the head of the gun violence task force.
If I could, go ahead, Margie.
No, I was just going to say that's really helpful. Thank you, Chandler. Go ahead, Christian.
Yeah, gonna ride this wave of trainings until it crests. I do agree. I think the unique part about being in the world of Zoom is that the trainings that we can offer as a community are pretty expansive. Of course, it is about access to technology to receive those trainings. So that has to be taken into account as well. But I will say that a current example kind of what Eli was talking about, offering kind of these recurring monthly trainings that the RJ team is doing. We are currently conducting a series on anti-racism, on allyship, microaggressions in the wake of the murder of Mr. Floyd. So this will be kind of abutted by two-part training. One is an introduction to restorative justice for people to use. And then the second part will be an advanced immersion into the actual tactics of practice that RJ practices are how they utilize. And we have folks that come around from school systems, as I said before, as private citizens. But most notably, we are now partnering with youth organizations throughout Montgomery County, as well as Fairfax County in Virginia, to do some training and partnership work. So the reason I share all of that is that we are fully capable of tailoring trainings to particular needs, to a particular length. And I know that I speak from the restorative justice perspective, but we have a whole host of experienced practitioners such as Margaret, such as Dr. McCarthy, such as John and Merwin, who I'm sure would be exceptional providers of introduction and training in that way. So circling back around, just want to say that is more than possible, and I would actually venture to say quickly possible too. So thank you for letting me share.
I would also, sorry, go ahead, Mark.
Okay, just one little point that tends to be sensitive, but it's good to think about it in the earlier times, is how to make connections with the police. So I'm using it in a very global way, but it could be any level of the police. As Eli would say, that connection, I think DCP's teams has been trying to establish that connection in various ways and forms. In fact, we have a discussion with a church group that we're going to have this Sunday. And these forays seem to be being made, and it's a very long-term process, but getting the police on board in terms of restorative justice, what does that mean? Relationship, community policing. So it's something that's being talked about. So is there a link within the police services that can be brought on board, even as you're beginning to think about this? It's always contextual, I fully understand, which is why I say it can be sensitive, but just something to keep in mind.
Margie, I feel like Bob gave you his notes on like what we've been wanting to do and trying to do, and have taken like some of those steps that you've outlined, and then like lost some people or had transitions, and then COVID. And so I feel like this is a great conversation to just kind of reground us in those steps around that like one-to-one relationship building, that door knocking. I love your little card idea with the QR code of having a place where like resources can live, and our analog to that is updating this one pager we have for neighbors on alternatives to policing. And so it basically has like a flow chart on if you need to actually call the police, and then confirming that you don't, like here are different agencies depending on the crisis or situation that you can either share with the neighbor or call yourself. So I think there are a lot of like similar strands that are going to be good to pull on.
Yeah, and we were close. I mean, again, before it was COVID, we had the last meeting we had done as the Ward 1 Public Safety Coalition was a breakfast at Columbia Heights Village that had maybe 30, 35 different people there with, I think, 20 different organizations, business, nonprofit, government, health, education, civic society, with longtime residents, new residents, people that were experiencing homelessness, street vendors that were experiencing police harassment. So the different pieces are there for us. I think the biggest challenge that I faced was being organized by myself and one other organizer as just kind of what we do. We're just organizers, but it wasn't, we didn't have a backbone organization. And I think that's been probably one of our biggest struggles is obviously the commissioners are all overworked and underpaid. They're paid $0, which is ridiculous for what they're trying to do. They already have their kind of committees they're on. Is we don't have a backbone organization to lead a lot of those initiatives. And I think that's one of the things that we run into is like these trainings are great, the different initiatives are great, but it comes down to individual residents to organize. It's just not sustainable. The mutual aid work we've done has been sustainable, at least on our end as this committee, as well as the Ward 1 Public Safety Committee coalition, because we've had a backbone organization at Columbia Heights Village. And I think that would be kind of a worthwhile to remember that the Tenant Association and Paul Jones, they've been trying, they are the community, they are the young people that are there. They have young people that have already been talking about these issues and doing violence prevention work. And so I think that would be, that for me, at least in this work, that's a natural partnership because it's an organization that's been here and will continue to be here into the future. They also have committed resources as they're partial owners of their building through their TOPA rights here in the district that were exercised in 2018. And so as we talk about this as a group, anything that we talk about here, I always kind of bring to them because they're a way to make this work sustainable and to actually have consistent trainings. I think the biggest issue is, I think Chris was alluding to, is there's cost to all of this, to our time, to our energy, to trainings, is then again, finding the resources to do that. And that's where I kind of look to my neighbors who have like Range Rovers and multi-million-dollar condos on my block. How do we try to get the entire community to buy in and understand the mutual benefit if we all support these types of programming? And then to the idea of the card, I think that's the easiest thing that we've asked the Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement was to update it. And I'm still looking for partnership on this because, again, I can't do it on my own, is partnership and updating some type of card or something to hand out to people. I know I have like a refrigerator magnet from ANC 1A from like 2002 that my housemate has had up on his refrigerator forever, but it's like 17 years old or whatever with past commissioners. But I would be more than happy to go door to door and start doing that outreach. But I just need support or others to help develop what that card would be. And then to actually go out and to connect. But I think for us, for me at least, is that backbone support is what I think we're missing a lot of to consistently have this work be implemented.
Awesome. So I just want to kind of summarize a few things that I'm hearing and just kind of get an overview before Eli goes into like the next steps. One of the other trainings that I wanted to touch on, I mean, I think the digital kind of transformation we've all been experiencing the last year has been crazy and awesome in a lot of ways. But I also want to stress that like I think there's a great opportunity for providing kind of in some of these areas where there might be substance abuse concerns, like providing Narcan trainings or Narcan, like handing that out. Again, that's something I have to look more into. I'm pretty sure that I've heard something within like the activist community where like there's ways you can actually just get it without it in DC specifically, that you can get it just handed out, which is awesome. Because in Maryland, it's not that way. So yeah. So I think we should definitely, like, that could be a great way to also get involved. in these communities. But yeah, I'm hearing a lot about like the need. I'm sorry, my dog.
It's funny because I sent a private message to Commissioner Bonneau about that, but she got Narcan training, and the same night I went to do the online training, which was not required, and walked into CVS and picked it right up. So we did actually discuss about getting a lot of people getting the Narcan training, and not even training, just having a little demonstration about what signs and how to do it. So I think it's even easier. I wasted the 2 hours of training, but I learned a lot. But just the fact that you don't even need it anymore, just show up and ask for Narcan, they'll give it to you, and as many as you want. So I think it's great. I mean, it's such a big problem in our area. I think it would be good if a lot of people had the training. So yeah, thank you for that.
Yeah, I'm also hearing that the training should be bilingual at the very least, like that there's, so I think that's an important note. I'm not sure about my capacity. I'm not bilingual, but I think we can definitely find those resources. But I'm hearing themes of like gathering resources and updating resources, gathering like teams to go out and start building connections with communities. Kind of maybe there's opportunities to like gain feedback with these community members and do like smaller like mutual aid or resource like distribution type things, just kind of in combination with the connecting with the community once kind of there's a more targeted approach. But then there's also like trainings can be going on throughout this process too. And then also kind of like building the specific needs for certain focused trainings and like consistent trainings. But EY, what do you think? Or like, can you tell us what the next steps are?
Yeah, thanks for that, Margie. Yeah, I was actually going to kind of open it up and ask, Commissioner Layla and your committee, are there particular next steps that would make sense to you in light of our discussion, some of the things we identified as possible ways to be supportive? We're happy to respond to
that. I mean, I would look to Commissioner Wood on the idea around the pilot for the plaza, but I kind of really like that as like a concrete, like train the trainer, have a few invested community members that want to spend some more time at the plaza. And like, I know de-escalation training is like, or non-violent bystander training is like more than that, but like just having having this positive presence there, and especially if that's bilingual, using that as an opportunity to like, I know we've done this in the past, but like ask those neighbors, like, what do you need? Like, why are you spending so much time here? And are there opportunities to connect them to resources as well? But Commissioner Wood, I saw some nodding, but.
Yeah, I agree. That would be great. I guess I have a little bit of hesitation on like, would this be safe for the bystanders? Just because it's like, it's not, I mean, these people a lot of times, like, they're not really in the right mind at the time of like high escalation points. So I think that's kind of my biggest question mark with that.
I won't speak for others, but I worked in the ER for like 7 years, and like I personally feel comfortable knowing my limits, I guess would be like or being able to kind of assess those kind of the point of no return, more or less. And I think that, again, like engaging during certain periods of time when it might be lower risk for everyone's safety, really, that would be a great place to start. I also, I think I just opened up the chat, but I saw like the trash pickups, and I think that would be great. And I also, I don't know how, there's a veterans activist group, Continue to Serve, that I know would be more than happy to partner with they've done a lot of trash pickups. They gained a lot of popularity from taking down a lot of the fascist stickers after the insurrection. And so they have a large volunteer list is what I'm trying to get across, and people tend to show up to their events. So it tends to be very helpful. And I know that they've been looking for areas to expand into and would be more than happy, and have asked us for advice and ways to help.
Yeah, and Judson, just a little more to your question, you know, it's a really important question. Like we don't want to like have people in places where there's a likelihood or probability that they're going to get hurt, which could lead to other people getting hurt. So there'd be a lot of prep work, you know, before people would be out there, both in terms of training and then lots of role plays and stuff like that, but also in terms of like building connections with people that are there, letting people know who this safety team is or whatever you might want to call them. You know, if they're going to wear yellow vest or something else, being clear about what that is and what it's not, those kind of expectations. You know, usually in this work, it's pretty rare that groups that are trained and that are, you know, there for the needs of all the stakeholders, it's pretty rare that those persons get hurt. You know, it's usually more often the people that have arms that will get hurt or hurt others, or it's people who are, you know, more clearly like partisan to one side or the other that end up being more at risk. So, you know, in a situation like this, I think we can ensure a pretty high standard of safety. But, you know, there is some risk in it, and that's sort of part of the point, is to like help our communities be willing to take a certain kind of risk so that we can transform the way that we deal with increased risk in our communities. So yeah, those would be some thoughts about it. But.
Yeah, I appreciate that. It puts me a little bit more at ease.
Looking at the time and hoping we can wrap up maybe in the next like 5 to 7 minutes. And I think we talked about the plaza. Bob, I really appreciated your reminder about the Columbia Heights Village Tenant Association. And I wonder if I could, sounds like you already talked to Paul and Cynthia coming out of these meetings anyways, but if you could see if there's an interest in the trainings that we talked about tonight, or like more intentional work between the DC Peace team, this committee, and Columbia Heights Village, where, you know, we can see if there are, you know, youth or just like other community members that are interested in learning more about this. And then, you know, if there is that interest, kind of set up a little bit of a training calendar and meeting schedule from that.
Cool.
Because I think you know, we could be like, yeah, let's do, you know, a training a month for the next year with you all. And it might just be the lovely, you know, 12 of us or on the call, which would not really meet the need, right? So let's start with one partner. Again, I like this idea of like a mini pilot, so to speak, or just like start with one part of the community. And then I think we should hold Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement, you know, hold their feet to the fire next month, make them update this one-page resource with a lot of these like non-police agency information and get us what we need for that. And then probably steal Margie's idea around this resource card once that's updated. And I have this like aspiration that as the public health emergency is lightened or lifted, that we can have block parties, we can go door to door, and we can have more socials and events, and move some things back into like face-to-face setting as well. Eli, how did, I realized I basically just was like, yes, all the things you do, we would like to partner with you on all of the things, but I'm trying to be, I'm trying to be a bit more realistic in terms of like some small bites at the apple.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. I think your steps that you outlined make a lot of sense. They seem like, you know, really doable and good ways to kind of feel it out and see what might be helpful and where some of the needs are, and you know, pilot some different things. So I think, yeah, I think those sound reasonable. I don't have anything else to add. We'd be happy to do what we can, and again, to like help train people so that they can do some of this stuff or become trainers themselves, you know. So those sound like great steps.
I mean, I have terrible Spanish speaking skills, but I would definitely love to go into the Civic Plaza and work with some of your team just to interact with the individuals that are hanging out quite often there. And as Commissioner Bonneau was talking about, figuring out, you know, what do they need? Why are they there? And then figuring out what kind of help. Because I was thinking of myself too with a Narcan. If someone is sleeping and they're really just passed out drunk and you wake them up to check on them, to Commissioner Wood's point, who knows what they might do, right? When you wake them up and they're just drunk. So I don't know. I was at the dog park and I saw someone who was drunk come by and taunt dogs and then pull a knife out of his backpack, right? So it's interesting things can happen. And if we can just talk to the individuals and find out, you know, what the issue is and how we can help, maybe we could solve these issues. That might be continuing, but if we had a team that knew how to handle this, we could go out during the weekdays or during the farmers market and just meet these individuals who are over by the Tivoli theater, just to find out you know, why they're there and what we could do to help. I think would be great.
I just want to mention one last thing. I was at a mutual aid event in Ward 4 last week, and some of the things that I heard that they were mentioning was just kind of like also that their mutual aid group is trying to kind of get better at sharing resources between the wards too. So I think that also could be used. I don't know if that's been discussed within your group, but just something I wanted to bring to light, that like I resonate with the fact that we're all like spread very thin, because there's so much wonderful progress to be made in the future. And so like teaming up and making sure that we're all collaborating is like the most powerful tool that we can probably have. So I just wanted to throw that out there as well, just to keep it in the back of the head. Thank you.
All right, Eli, are you the best point of contact to keep in touch moving forward, or are there others you want to loop in?
Yeah, I mean, you can start with me and I'll loop in the others here on the call that want to stay in communication about the, you know, the details, but we have a couple of these, so, you know, I'll be sharing the information with them as well. But yeah, that sounds great. And I know you all are doing some advocacy too around, you know, getting violent interrupters in your neighborhood and stuff. So if you need support in the advocacy space, you know, just let us know. I think we have people that are interested in that and would like to support, you know, kind of scaling up the structures such as that.
Really appreciate that. Any final thoughts or comments from anybody before we close out? Okay.
Thank you again so much for presenting.
So we are meeting the third Thursday of each month. So we will be back together in May on May 20th at 7. And as I mentioned earlier, Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement will be with us. We also have, I wanted to kind of gauge interest, and I can pose this to the Google group as well, since I know a number of neighbors weren't able to join tonight. The Police Reform Commission published all of their recommendations that went to council. So if we want any members from that commission to come and go over parts of the recommendations with us, or kind of do like a high level overview, that is an option as well.
Layla, do you know who's going to be coming from the Police Reform Commission?
We've had a couple members in the past, like while they were kind of developing the recommendations, but the chair of our ANC, Kent Bass, was on the commission. And so he did just like a really high level overview yesterday, and then said, depending on which recommendations we were most interested in, he could make sure that somebody that served on that committee attended our meeting, because they each served on 2 of the 5 committees. So he doesn't necessarily know like all the ins and outs of every committee, which makes sense. So
Yeah, totally.
I do not know, but that is kind of how we're approaching it. Yeah.
Layla, just a brief comment, on the police commission report, 2 of the main recommendations, one was for alternative first responders, and that included a set of de-escalators, right? And a second one was about no more police in schools, and that included creating what they called culturally sensitive de-escalators to be present and available in schools. So those could be a couple pieces, perhaps, that you all, if you all are interested, this could be a process that helps to kind of create some of those mechanisms.
Yeah, thanks for flagging those 2. We had a prior conversation around removing police from schools, but and about having other first responders. So yeah, but I didn't realize they used that de-escalator language in the recommendation. So thanks for flagging that. Margie, you can feel free to, I can put my email in the chat, but Bob works pretty closely with the mutual aid movement, and then I organize monthly cleanups like up in my single member district, and I have a couple neighbors that work directly with the Ward 1 mutual aid. So I kind of feel like if you want to start with me, we can kind of make the right connections from there, depending on what those opportunities are.
So I just want to mention, sometimes it can be a little sporadic, like things will just pop up and it'll be like, oh, like, yeah, I know where we can use that. So like, it might be like a quick email of like, hey, is there anywhere we can drop off like 20 loaves of bread or like spread them out? And like, if there's no answer, like that's totally fine. They will find a home, but like, it's a great way to getting familiar with like the neighborhood and things like that.
Yeah, thank you. And we have some good contacts at Strive DC as well as, oh my gosh, is it Sunrise? The other group that's doing like a lot of mutual aid work. And they're both like a couple blocks from my house. So I've had neighbors be like, I have all these extra toiletries or overbought toilet paper, or whatever the thing is, and we're like, all right, we'll find a home for these items. You guys are laughing because you're like, no one's giving away toilet paper. That's precious. It was precious. Well, thank you all so much for spending your evening with us, and it was really wonderful to hear about the work that you're doing, and feel free to reach out if you have other thoughts or ideas. And I'm excited for us to work together and look into the possibility of this pilot at the plaza, as well as get a sense of some interest around some trainings. So thanks so much.
Thanks, Layla.
Hey, y'all.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you all.